Hey guys, welcome back to another late night wander into history at SO. If you've got your blanket, a cup of tea, maybe the lights dimmed down just enough to feel like you live in a prehistoric cave, then tonight's story is for you. Because we're going way back, like way back before kings, queens, dynasties, and castles, back before Julius Caesar was busy pretending he wasn't bald, before pyramids, before farming, before fire. Yeah, tonight, we're heading to about 4.7 million years ago, a time when early humans, or at least the slightly confused, not yet Netflix binge-watching versions of us, were stumbling around the African savannas trying to figure out how to not die. And spoiler alert, they weren't very good at it. Now, I know what you're thinking. For 0.7 million years ago, that's basically a Sunday afternoon in geologic time. And you're right, the Earth had already been around for a casual 4.5 billion years by then. Dinosaurs had come and gone. Mammoths hadn't even RSVP'd yet. And here we were, these upright-ish primates just trying to make it through the day without becoming dinner for something with teeth longer than our arms. So tonight, let's slowly, gently, calmly, like the world's most boring safari tour guide, drift back into that world. We'll talk about what life was like without fire, how prehistoric humans survived barely, what they ate, where they slept, and why literally everything wanted to kill them. Don't worry though, I'll keep it soothing, because nothing says goodnight like imagining your great-great-great-great-grandfather being chased by a saber-toothed cat. So, picture this. The year is 4.7 million years ago. There are no cities, no tools, no TikTok, not even MySpace, just endless grasslands, scattered trees, rivers cutting through the land, and an entire zoo's worth of animals that would happily squash you just by rolling over. And there you are, a small, upright hominin, not quite Homo sapiens, not quite a tree-climbing ape, sort of like the beta version of humans. Let's call you Chad. Prehistoric Chad. Now, prehistoric Chad doesn't have fire, which means no cooked meat, no warm nights, no scary shadow puppet campfire stories. What you do have, raw roots, questionable berries, maybe a bug or two, if you're feeling crunchy, and water straight from a muddy river shared generously with the hippos. Sounds romantic, right? Like a camping trip, but without sleeping bags, or tents, or, safety. Let's talk about the biggest problem of life without fire, food. Because raw diets are cute when it's Instagram influencers eating salads in Bali, but when you're trying to gnaw through a hunk of raw meat with teeth designed for bananas, yeah, not so great. Early humans mostly ate plants, fruits, leaves, roots, the occasional dead animal they stumbled across, if they could get to it before the hyenas. And trust me, hyenas back then weren't the giggling Disney sidekicks. These were bone-crunching, nightmare hyenas. You do not mess with them. So, our ancestors became opportunists that if something was edible or vaguely chewable, it was on the menu. Raw bird eggs? Delicious. Random tuber dug from the dirt? Sure, why not? A carcass that had been lying in the sun for a few hours? Bon appetit. And somehow their stomachs handled it. Mine can't even handle Taco Bell after 10 p.m., so respect. But food was only half the problem. Let's drift over nights without fire. Imagine the sun sets, the sky goes dark, and suddenly every sound you hear could be something coming to eat you. Rustling grass? Could be a leopard. Snapping branch? Probably a giant hyena. Absolute silence? Yeah. Also terrifying, humans didn't exactly come equipped with night vision. Our eyes are basically useless in the dark, so Prehistoric nights were spent huddled together, maybe up in trees, trying not to roll over and fall onto the ground, or worse, onto something with claws. There's actually some evidence that early hominins slept in makeshift nests in trees, just like chimpanzees do today. Cozy little beds of leaves, which sounds sweet, until you realize that the tree could also be home to a very large, very bitey snake. So yeah, sleep was less restful slumber and more please don't die for the next 6 hours. Now, let's glide over to climate. Without fire, humans were at the mercy of the weather. Cold nights? Too bad. Rainstorms? Better hope you like being damp. There's a reason survival reality shows always start with step 1, make fire. It's kind of a big deal, but fire wasn't mastered until about 1 million years ago, give or take, which means for millions of years before that, our ancestors were just raw dogging life. Literally, some scientists even think that the invention of fire is what allowed our brains to grow bigger because cooked food gave us more calories, which means that for 3 million years, humans were walking around with smaller brains, probably wondering why everything hurt and why avocados were so hard to peel. And then there's the neighbors. Picture living in a neighborhood where your roommates are elephants the size of buses, lions twice the size of today's lions, crocodiles longer than a minivan. Oh, and let's not forget the saber-toothed cats with fangs so big they look like bad cosplay. This was the daily reality, and humans were not the apex predators, but we were the snacks. Soft, slow, slightly crunchy snacks Oh, how did they survive? Teamwork. Early humans huddled in groups. Safety in numbers. If a leopard was circling, maybe it would grab the guy next to you instead. Friendship, they also used sticks and rocks. Not as weapons at first, but eventually, yes, because nothing says don't eat me like throwing a rock at something that weighs 500 pounds. Now, here's the irony. Today, people romanticize primitive living, paleo diets, wilderness retreats, minimalist cabins in the woods. But back then, no one was posting #vanlife with their mud hut. They were just trying not to starve. And somehow, despite everything, they made it. They survived long enough to pass down genes, to evolve, to eventually figure out that rubbing 2 sticks together could stop you from freezing to death, which honestly deserves more credit than half the Nobel Prizes out there. And that's just scratching the surface. Because life without fire wasn't just about food or warmth. It shaped everything. Where humans could live, how far they could travel, even how their bodies evolved. But let's drift a little deeper, because if you think surviving the African savanna without fire was hard, wait until you see what happened when they tried migrating to colder places. Spoiler, it did not go well. So we left off with our prehistoric friends huddled in trees, praying they didn't roll onto a leopard. Cute, cozy, but not exactly sustainable, because eventually humans did what humans always do. They got restless. Somewhere around 4 million years ago, our ancestors decided, hey, maybe let's not stay in one place forever. Let's wander, which honestly was brave. Imagine looking out over an endless horizon of grass and just saying, yeah, let's walk into that. Maybe there's food, or maybe there's 12 lions waiting. Spoiler, usually lions. Now, without fire, migration was complicated. Let's say you're prehistoric Chad again, walking across the savannah with your little troop. The sun's beating down. You're thirsty. You're carrying nothing because bags haven't been invented yet. No fire, no cooked snacks, not even trail mix. Just you, your questionable raw diet, and your bare feet. The deal you want camp for the night? Well, You can't, because camping requires tents or at least a fire. Instead, you just collapse under a tree and hope no hyenas clock in for the night shift. And if the weather changes, too hot, too cold, too rainy, congratulations, you're miserable. The miracle is that they survived long enough to keep moving. And eventually they spread far beyond Africa. But early on, these migrations were messy. Some groups made it, others didn't. And there's no Yelp review from 4 million BC to warn you which valley was full of food and which one was basically Jurassic Park. Let's talk about predators, because honestly, that's most of the prehistoric travel experience. Today, if you go for a hike, the worst thing you worry about is forgetting sunscreen. Back then, you were walking buffets, leopards stalked from trees, saber-toothed cats lurked in the tall grass, crocodiles just sat there waiting for you to get too close to the river. And the thing is, humans had no fire to scare them off. No torches. No. Wave the flame dramatically and the lion backs away. Nope. If something wanted to eat you, your options were run, climb a tree, or throw a stick and pray that it's humbling. Really, we like to think of humans as clever, dominant, the big boss of Earth. But rewind 4 million years, and we were basically nature's chew toy. Now, food on the move? Still depressing. Remember, no cooking.so. Migration meant foraging, endless foraging. You'd stop, dig up roots, chew on bitter plants, maybe crack open a nut if you had the strength. Protein usually came from scavenging, which meant waiting for some actual predator to kill something and then sneaking in after they left. Yes, humans started as the hyenas of hyenas. We were the awkward little side characters that stole leftovers, and it worked, because scavenged meat still gave calories, and calories meant survival. Even if it came with a side of salmonella, alright, let's float over to cold weather. This part is honestly kind of tragic. Humans without fire in cold climates were basically doomed. Our bodies just aren't built for freezing nights. No fur coat, no thick skin. Just goosebumps, which don't help at all. So, early migrations into colder regions were brutal. Without fire, you couldn't warm up. You couldn't cook food to get the extra calories your body needed. And you definitely couldn't keep predators away. The result? A lot of failed experiments. Groups that tried to move too far north probably just didn't last long. It wasn't until fire came into play around 1 million years ago that humans could finally handle chilly climates. Before that, yes, stay near the equator or freeze. And here's the thing, this long, miserable period of firelessness shaped how humans lived for millions of years. They evolved bigger social groups because lone humans were basically lion snacks. They became opportunistic eaters because if you're not picky, you don't starve. They stayed in warmer regions because cold was basically instant death. That IT wasn't glamorous. It wasn't epic. It wasn't even very smart. But it worked just barely enough to keep us going. And honestly, if you're listening to this while trying to fall asleep, this is the perfect bedtime image. Picture yourself curled up on a bed of leaves in a tree, surrounded by your equally confused family. No fire, no warmth, just the stars above, the sound of insects, and the occasional growl reminding you that you're absolutely not at the top of the food chain. But hey, you made it through the night, which back then was basically the highest achievement possible. And that brings us gently to the next part. What did these early humans actually look like? Because if you're picturing modern people in caveman outfits holding clubs, sorry, not even close. They were different, shorter, hairier, and honestly kind of awkward. Let's float into that now. Alright, so let's set the record straight. When most people imagine prehistoric humans, they picture some cartoon caveman, broad shoulders, shaggy hair, carrying a big wooden club, maybe yelling, ugh. Yeah, know that if you travel back 4.7 million years, the first thing you'd probably think is, wait, is that even human? Or is that a very weird-looking chimpanzee? Because here's the truth. They weren't quite like us yet. They were Australopithecines, our distant ancestors. Think of them as the awkward teenage phase of evolution. Not quite ape, not quite human, just somewhere in the middle. The height situation first off, they were short, like really short. We're talking 3 to 4 feet tall. So imagine today's average 6-foot NBA player standing next to them. That's not even fair. It's like comparing a toddler to a giraffe, but shortness was actually practical. Smaller bodies need fewer calories, which was handy because food was scarce. Also, let's be honest, running from lions is easier if you're not carrying around an extra 200 pounds of muscle. The face that launched Zero ships now about their looks. Forget the heroic caveman jawline you see in movies. Early humans had flat faces, heavy brows, wide noses, big teeth. Honestly, they weren't winning any beauty contests. You know how we sometimes joke about a resting caveman face? Yeah, they invented that, and their heads? Smaller brains. Around 400 to 500 cubic centimeters. That's basically the same as a chimpanzee. Compare that to modern humans with brains around 1400 cubic centimeters. So, if you're ever stressed about forgetting where you left your keys, just remember, your ancestors were working with about 1/3 the brain power, walking upright. Here's the interesting part. Australopithecines could walk upright. Not gracefully, not runway model strutting. More like an awkward shuffle. Imagine a toddler that just learned to walk, knees a little bent, hips wobbling, arms swinging wide for balance. That was basically them. But this tiny detail, standing on 2 feet, changed everything. It freed up their hands. They could carry food. They could hold sticks. They could eventually invent tools. It was clumsy, but it worked. And it made them different from apes. Apes mostly stayed on 4 limbs. Early humans said, no thanks, I'm going vertical. The hairy reality now, let's talk body hair. Sorry to burst the bubble, but yes, they were very hairy. If you picture modern humans but covered in thick fur, that's closer to reality. Think somewhere between shaggy dog and survivalist who hasn't discovered razors yet. Hair helped with warmth since they didn't have fire. It also offered a little sun protection. The caveman with hairy chest trope, pretty accurate except multiply it by 10. Social vibes, and finally the vibe check. What do they act like? Well, imagine small groups of 10 to 20 people. No language as we know it, just grunts, gestures, and maybe some simple calls. Communication was basically, food here, danger there, don't touch my root vegetable. Not very poetic, but hey, effective. They probably slept huddled together for safety, and bonding came through grooming, picking bugs out of each other's fur. Which, let's be real, is the least romantic date activity of all time. But these little social groups were the first spark of what would become human culture, eating together, protecting each other, passing on basic survival skills. IT wasn't much, but it was a start. So next time someone says, I wish I could see life for a million years ago, remind them, sure, but be ready to meet a group of short, hairy, flat-faced toddlers with bad posture and questionable hygiene. That was humanity, not glamorous, not noble, but crucial. And now that we've met them, let's drift to another cozy detail. What did they actually eat every day? Because if you think it was a paleo diet full of steak and bacon, yeah, not even close. Okay, so here's the thing. When people hear prehistoric diet, they usually imagine something like roasted mammoth steaks, giant fish pulled out of a river, maybe some Flintstone-style dinosaur ribs. Yeah, about that. The reality was way less glamorous. Most of the time, prehistoric humans were basically eating whatever they could grab before something else grabbed them. Plants, roots, and more roots. Let's start with the basics. Plants. If you were an Australopithecine 4.7 million years ago, congratulations, you were basically on the world's first vegetarian diet, and not the fun kind with fresh salads and fruit smoothies. Nope, we're talking roots. Tubers. Wild grasses, basically the stuff we mow down on our lawns today. Picture pulling up some random root, brushing the dirt off with your hand, and gnawing on it raw. That was dinner. Chewy, fibrous, bland, the prehistoric version of chewing gum, except it had zero flavor and was probably giving you a jaw workout instead. The occasional fruit. Now, if you got lucky, you might stumble across a tree with some fruit, wild figs, maybe some berries. But keep in mind, these weren't the juicy, sweet fruits we have today. Modern apples, bananas, and watermelons are the result of thousands of years of selective breeding. Back then, fruit was smaller, more sour, and sometimes bitter. Basically nature's way of saying, sure, you can eat this, but don't expect a 5-star experience. Bugs, the original protein bar, and then, of course, we have the insects, crickets, termites, grubs, ants. Yes, bugs were on the menu. Because when you don't have fire and you don't have tools, you take protein wherever you can find it. Crunchy, squishy, sometimes wiggly. It didn't matter that a handful of termites might have been the difference between surviving the night or collapsing from hunger. The next time someone complains about their protein shake tasting chalky, remind them, at least you're not eating beetles by the handful. Meat? Rarely now. Let's talk meat. Did they eat it? Yes. Did they eat it often? Not really. Because here's the problem. Meat requires you to catch something, and remember these early humans were about 3 to 4 feet tall, slow runners, and had no weapons. So, chasing down a gazelle? Out of the question. Taking on a lion? Yeah, that's basically a suicide mission. Most of the meat they got came from scavenging, waiting until a bigger predator killed something, then sneaking in later to nibble at the scraps. Not exactly a heroic hunt. More like, excuse me, Mr. Sabretooth, are you done with that leg bone? And even when they did manage to get meat, they couldn't cook it raw. Stringy, tough. Probably crawling with bacteria, and yet it was still worth it. Because every calorie mattered. Water and the struggle for it now. Let's not forget hydration. Finding water was a daily problem. Streams, rivers, lakes. If you stumbled across one, you drank. If not, tough luck. NO bottles. No filters. No hydration reminders on your smartwatch. Just cupping your hands, drinking whatever you found, and hoping it didn't make you sick, and considering prehistoric water sources were also home to hippos, crocodiles, and parasites. Yeah, every sip was a gamble. The constant hunger. So, what's the main takeaway? Prehistoric humans lived in constant hunger. Food wasn't guaranteed. Meals weren't planned. Every day was basically wake up, wander around, hope you find something edible before nightfall. Sometimes they ate well. Sometimes they starved, and this constant uncertainty shaped human evolution. IT made us opportunistic eaters, willing to try almost anything. The modern contrast now, just pause for a second. Think about how far we've come. Today, you can order a cheeseburger at 2 a.m. with one tap on your phone. Back then, you were lucky if you found half a rotten fruit before sunset. It's ironic. Our ancestors would have killed for a single slice of bread. And we complain when our fries are a little cold. Perspective. So, yeah. The prehistoric diet, mostly roots, leaves, bugs, and the occasional stolen bite of raw meat. Not glamorous. Not tasty. But hey, it kept them alive long enough for us to be here. Now that we've had our disappointing dinner, let's drift onward to the next cozy topic. How did they deal with predators trying to eat them? Because, spoiler alert, prehistoric humans weren't at the top of the food chain. They were more like the midnight snack. Alright, so we've covered food. Now let's talk about the little issue of not becoming food yourself. Because 4.7 million years ago, prehistoric humans weren't the apex. Predators, nope, not even close. They were more like the midnight snack at nature's buffet. Big cats everywhere. Let's start with the cats. Africa during this time was crawling with big cats that made modern lions look like lazy house pets. Saber-toothed cats, for example, huge, muscular, fangs like knives that you're walking along, minding your own business, gnawing on a root, and suddenly, bam, something the size of a couch with teeth longer than your fingers leaps out of the tall grass. Not a fun way to end your day. And the worst part, prehistoric humans couldn't fight back. That no spears, no fire, no shields. Their best defense was basically running in zigzags and praying. Hyenas, the early nightmares. Then we have hyenas. And no, not the funny, giggly ones from The Lion King. These were ancient bone-crushing hyenas, with jaws strong enough to snap femurs like breadsticks. They hunted in packs, they were relentless, and they were perfectly fine with snacking on a wandering, half-starved hominid. Oh yes. Falling asleep at night meant always wondering if you'd wake up to the sound of hyenas circling. Crocodiles and rivers of doom water wasn't safe either. Remember those lakes and rivers you had to drink from? Yeah. They were basically crocodile-themed parks. Point one wrong step, and you'd get yanked under by a prehistoric crocodile twice the size of the ones today. Imagine going to quench your thirst, only to realize you've just signed up as the main course in a reptile buffet. Not ideal. Birds of prey. Because why not add that too? Oh, and here's something people forget. Giant birds of prey. Some scientists think massive eagles could swoop down and snatch young hominids off the ground. Yep, imagine being a toddler Australopithecine, waddling around happily, then whooshed at you're airborne, carried off by a bird with talons the size of steak knives. Basically, the sky wasn't safe either. Nighttime equals anxiety, so what did this mean? It meant nighttime was terrifying. Without fire, prehistoric humans had no way to scare predators off at cozy campfires. No torches, just darkness. And in the dark, lions, leopards, and hyenas had the advantage. Prehistoric humans probably huddled in groups, clinging to trees or hiding in caves and sleep. Yeah, sleep was shallow. Always one ear open, always ready to scramble. Think about that next time you complain about your noisy upstairs neighbors. Survival through caution. Here's the thing though. Being prey wasn't just miserable. It was educational. The IT forced early humans to become hyper-aware of their surroundings. The TO developed sharper eyesight, quicker reflexes, and a strong sense of community. Basically, teamwork was survival. Point one person keeping watch, while the others rested. Point one ear tuned to the wind. One nose sniffing for danger. The IT was a constant balancing act. Tired, hungry, scared, but alive. The irony of the top predator myth. It's funny, isn't it? Today, we like to think of humans as the masters of the planet. But back then, we were closer to the bottom of the menu. Every animal around us was faster, stronger, and deadlier. We were the weaklings of the savannah, and yet somehow we endured, not by being the biggest, not by being the strongest, but by being the clever ones. That right there is the beginning of human evolution's biggest plot twist. So, now that we've made it through the predators, let's wander gently into our next sleepy topic. How did prehistoric humans deal with shelter? Because without houses, fire, or cozy beds, yeah, their real estate situation was pretty grim. So that was life roughly 4.7 million years ago. No fire, no cozy homes, no smartphones, no Netflix, no DoorDash. Just hungry little hominids wandering across a dangerous landscape filled with snakes, saber-toothed cats, crocodiles, and the occasional grumpy bird of prey. Not exactly the luxury resort you'd book for vacation, right? But somehow, against every odd stacked against them, they survived, they scavenged, they foraged, they stuck together, and little by little, generation by generation, they learned. That constant fear of predators turned into awareness, that endless hunger turned into invention, and that endless wandering became the slow, winding road to humanity. The sleepy reflection, when you think about it, we're basically sitting here today because some half-starved hominid managed not to get eaten by a saber-toothed cat. That's the entire foundation of our species. Kinda humbling, right? So next time you curl up in bed, with your blanket, your pillow, maybe a nightlight, maybe a fan humming in the corner, just remember, for millions of years, your ancestors didn't have that. They had caves, or maybe a tree branch, if they were lucky. and the constant sound of hyenas laughing in the dark, that SO, really, you've got a pretty good, the gentle fade out, and with that thought, I think we'll leave it here. The fire hasn't been discovered yet. The shelters are still rough. The food is questionable at best. But the story of prehistoric humans is just beginning, and maybe as you drift off tonight, you'll imagine yourself sitting there on the ancient savanna, listening to the wind in the grass, watching the stars, and feeling just a little grateful that you're not on the midnight snack menu anymore. This is Fact Storm History. Thanks for listening, and good night.